Agnes, good morning. Agnes. Elvis and
Yes.
Maniki. Vincent Maniki.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Here.
Yes, sir.
Vincent.
Yes, sir.
Unanisikia vizuri?
Sana kusikia vizuri.
Oh. Agnes naona na Elvis wamepotea, lakini nafikiria labda watatupata tukishaendelea.
Sawa.
Now, have you watched the video?
About what is photography?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, in your own words, can you be able to explain what photography is?
I can say it's a way which it's a process which we capture light to produce maybe photos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, what you're saying is very true.
Yeah.
Photography
Yeah.
basically, if we start now describing and really defining what photography is,
Yeah.
the best thing that we need to be able to look into is what is this particular term? We have two terms that have been joined together so that they form a compound word. That's photo, a Greek term,
Yeah.
and we also have graphy, which basically is about drawing.
Yeah.
And if we talk about light and drawing and we join them together, they basically give us an impression that we are drawing by using light.
Yeah.
So when we describe or when we define now photography, we can basically say photography is a way of drawing using light.
Yeah.
But now, as a photojournalist, we need to be able to go further and look into it. How do we define photography? Now, that will put us in a position to be able to say that photography is basically one, an art, and two, it's a science. And the reason why we are saying it's an art is because we are using task skills, just like another language, so that we can be able to gather or to put together given information to tell a particular story. And when we talk about now it being a science, we say it's a science because the kind of equipment that we're using, that's the camera, is basically as a result, it's a product of science.
Yeah.
That has been manufactured using and obeying the rules of physics, that is in relation to light, so that at the end of the day, when these rules of science are obeyed, they give us a given product. That's a photo at the end of the day. Then that will be able to tell us now that photojournalism or photojournalism is basically a way of telling stories. John Tinda. Now, when we talk about photojournalism, John Tinda, your microphone is giving us an echo. Okay. Now, when we talk about photojournalism then becomes a simplest way of how people, now journalists, tell stories by the use of photos. And when they tell those particular stories, they tell those stories in a visual way. Are we together? So what I'm trying to say is that photojournalism basically is a visual way of telling stories by the use of photographs, and we have understood and we have defined what is photography. So we now have photography as one particular area that has two words that makes a compound word or a compound noun: photo, light, and graphy, drawing. Now, photography is a way of capturing images so that you can be able to to record them. The moment you have photography, and now us talk about photojournalism, then we have photography and journalism combined together. And when they are combined together, then we say photojournalism is a way of telling stories visually to a particular target audience that you have in mind as a journalist. That's how.
Yeah.
Now, when we
You are now unmuted.
sorry?
John.
Hello, John. Hello, John.
You are now unmuted.
Yes, sir.
Unanisikia vizuri?
Yes, yes.
Microphone yako
Yes.
inapeana echo.
Okay, let me see.
Now, when we talk about photojournalism, like I've said, photojournalism is another compound word that has actually looked into photography as an art and a science of how we capture images, and then the moment we have captured those particular images, we look into journalism as a form of telling stories on current affairs or on then them together. Then it becomes now a way of telling stories visually, just like other journalists who are in the field. Probably when we look into a journalist who is a reporter from a given area who writes his or her stories, then when we look into this area, a photojournalist will be able, instead of writing now, him will be capturing images by the use of the camera so that these particular photos will enable him or her to tell the stories. Then we now have those two words put together so that we can be able to understand now how they are put together and the reason why they have been put together. This is a journalist who has been trained, and the reason why he has been trained is to get to understand and know how to tell stories. But what kind of stories? Now, for him or for her, is basically to tell stories visually. And we understand how now it becomes a visual because they are basically using photos. And these particular photos, we have understood how they have been captured. Now, what we need to be able to understand is that journalism is basically a way of telling stories. And when we tell stories by using action words. Now, I remember in English classes, we were told that we have parts of speech. We have nouns, we have verbs, we have adjectives, we have pronouns, and all that. And when we are told that we have those particular parts of speech, the most important part of speech for a journalist is actually the verb. The nouns, we are not negating the value that the nouns can have. We are not negating the value of adjectives that they can be able to have on thing, but we are saying that in any particular work that one does as a journalist, the most important part of what he does is actually to look into how do you make use of the verbs so that you can be able to tell stories. It might be able to sound simple way, but it's actually what captures the imagination of that particular audience that you are targeting with that particular story. So the moment you make use of the verbs, then you have a way that you can be able to capture the attention of that particular audience that you have. So if a journalist who writes stories makes use of the verbs, then what will be the verbs for a photojournalist? Now, what we need to be able to understand is that in photojournalism, verbs are basically images of activities, images that keep on telling us what's happening. That when you look into that particular picture or that particular photo, you'll be able to say, aha, these people are actually fighting. Aha, these people are actually driving. These people are probably greeting one another. Those are the things that we need to be able to look at and to tell good stories as photojournalists. So a good photo in photojournalism is not a well exposed photo. It's not a beautiful photo, a photo that can actually tell a story. And how can it be able to tell a story? It's a photo that has verbs in it. People are fighting, people are demonstrating, one is jumping up and down. Probably we have a cat that is actually climbing a tree and being that when one looks into it, there's an action that's seen on. So at the end of the day, what we need to be able to have is verbs in all the pictures that we are having. I think I'm clear there. Right? Hello. Njiko. Idhaka Wanjiko, unanisikia?
Yes.
You are now unmuted. You are now You are now unmuted.
What's the matter, sir?
Mnasikia vizuri sasa?
Mm.
You may to we have physically looked into what is this that we are defining. Then we move a step higher, defining as photogenetic. Kuna swali hapo? Let me make a recap of what we have looked into. One, that we want to define and understand what is this that we are defining as what? Photography. We have seen photography is a combination of two photo and photo is basically basically means light. And when you talk about graphy, graphy is a way of drawing. Now, when we combine these two terms together, photo and graphy, we are saying we are using light to be able to draw. And what are we drawing? We're drawing a picture, we are drawing an image, we are drawing a particular illustration. So at the end of the day, when we do photography, we are basically using light to be able to draw visual images that we can be able to make use of so that we can tell stories. Now, The deeper part of it is, if we understand how the camera works, is that uh, we will have light on one end, and we will also have a subject on the other end, and we will be able to have a camera in the middle. And when this particular camera focuses on the subject, the light that has actually fallen on the subject and been reflected back is what gets into the camera. And when it gets into the camera, then the camera has an ability as a result of the science in it, so that it can be able to capture those particular that particular reflected um, light, and that's how it records what the image. And once it records that particular image, the image is now what you call a photograph. In later on, probably in semester 3, you'll be able to understand that the picture is what we refer as a photo, and in videography or in cinematography, we also refer to it as a frame. That one single still picture or photo is basically a reflection of what the subject is. Once we have known that that is what we call photography, it being an art as a result of the skills that we use, so that you can be able to capture those particular reflected light from the subject onto the camera, then we look into photography, and we also look into journalism. Now, journalism is basically a social science, and basically an art of telling stories about current events or current issues. Now, we understand what photography is, and we know now what journalism is. And when we combine photography and journalism together, then what we come up with is photojournalism. Photojournalism now becomes a way of telling stories visually about current events, about current issues that are affecting our own society, that particular society again. So what happens is, now we are going to use photos to tell what stories as journalists. Now, as understanding what photojournalism is to that particular extent, then we need now to be able to look into what will be the right kind of photos that we can be able to use, so that at the end of the day we can be able to tell those particular stories. Like I told you initially, journalism basically hands for verbs. For you to tell a great story will basically be focusing on showing us the action. Now, when we talk about action, I want you to focus back and look into the things that we were learning in English classes. That's this is something that was covered in Form 1. I think the first topic, parts of speech. On parts of speech, we have the nouns, we have the adjectives, we have the verbs, we have the adverbs, we have the articles. But now neglect the other parts of speech and focus on verbs. And we were told that a verb is basically an action word. Now, if it's an action word, then those are the ones that you're meant, or you're likely, or you're supposed to be using, so that you can be able to tell good stories that an audience requires to understand what's happening. He doesn't, or she doesn't really necessarily want to understand how it did happen. So that's something that will be under debate again, and sometimes it can be something that is required to be done. But the most important part or area is, how do you make use of the verbs? Now, in photojournalism, you cannot use the verbs like talk, run. How do you look for those particular what verbs? Now, in photojournalism, verbs will be pictures or photos or frames that will show us things that are happening. If you take a photo of Uhuru Kenyatta standing, and another person take a photo of Uhuru speaking or addressing a crowd, the one who has taken a photo of Uhuru Kenyatta addressing a crowd is regarded to be a very good journalistic photo. Why? Because there's something that he's doing. But the one that you will be standing and posing for that particular photo might be looking good, yes, might be very beautiful, but at the end of the day, that particular photo is not going to be a good journalistic what photo. It can be a good portrait photo that can be placed in the house, but it's not a good what? It's not a good photo that we can be able to use to tell stories. So that's something that we need now to be able to look into. And I want to stop at that particular point and ask if there is any of us who has a question or a concern, so that we can be able to work on it before I move forward. John. John. John Mtinda, unasikia? Abel. Abel. Agnes. Agnes, unasikia? Femi. Femi, unanipata?
Yes, I can get you.
Unanipata?
Yes.
Tumesikizana vile nimeelezea.
Yes.
Okay, in your own terms, Femi, what can you
Yeah.
define photojournalism to be?
I can say photojournalism is the um, photojournalism
Mm-hmm.
is, I think it can be the passing of information through visual.
Passing of information through
Visual.
visuals. Yeah, what you're saying is basically right, that photojournalism is a way of telling stories visually. And when we talk about passing information visually, we are talking about the use of photos so that you can be able to tell stories. And we have looked into what will be those good photos that will be able to tell what stories. And what we have agreed is those particular photos must be action photos, photos that show us an action. There's something that is taking place. That is taking place. Sasa. Deborah. Deborah. John. 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 Okay. Now, what I want to do is basically to move forward and talk about. John,
I have a
unanipata
question.
vizuri? Yeah. Yes, for me.
So, what's the relationship between photojournalism and photojournalist?
Journalism
Is
and
it?
photojournalists.
Yes.
Okay. Now, photojournalism is a way of telling stories visually, and the person who does that, the person who does photojournalism is actually the person that we refer as a photojournalist. That's how.
Yes.
Yeah, like
So
just
it
like
so it deals only with photos. There's no any issue of video or anything like that.
yeah, we cannot completely say that there won't be writing, because the modern world of journalism requires a
Mm,
person who is well rounded, a person who can be able to do several things at the same time. And one thing that you'll get to realize is, if you will be sent to a particular place, let's take an example, you've been sent to Mombasa, be a reporter
mm,
for Citizen Weekly, or you've been sent to Kisumu as a reporter for NTV, the Nation newspaper, you'll get to realize that at the end of the day, you'll be required, yes, to write a story, and at the end of the day,
mm.
also you're required to supply a photo that will complement what you have written. That's how.
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah, you cannot um, completely say that a photojournalist basically works with what, photos only. And number two, I want to bring in this in relation to your question. Journalism does not define those who work in the print media alone. It also encompasses, or it also combines with those who work in the broadcast media. That a photojournalist, whether you are going for video or you are going for still photos, you are still a photojournalist. Awesome. Unaelewana? What I'm trying to say is that photojournalism is both for print media and for broadcast media. That even if you are doing broadcast media and you have been sent to be able to cover a given event, and you are supposed to record video, you are termed as a photojournalist. And even in print media, you have been sent out and you have been told, now cover that particular event and bring as photos. That again is regarded, or you are regarded as a photojournalist. So it's not only in print media, it also covers for broadcast media. So at the end of the day, all of us, we will be using the same tool, that is the camera. Only that one will be having still photos and another one will be having moving photos or moving images.
Okay. Then, teacher, when we were watching the YouTube video,
Mhm.
I saw something like, I don't know, photography or photojournalism is divided into three. There is
Mhm.
art, documentary, and commercial. So how does that relate to photojournalism?
Okay, now I when you look into that particular video and you look into the notes that I actually sent you, you will be able to realize that we have various types of photojournalists. And the notes that I actually sent you will give you almost to around six types of photojournalists, as compared to only three that were given by that particular video. And when you talk about commercial photojournalists, you get to understand these are people who do photography, do photojournalism for the purpose of payment. They look into, they are taking a particular photo. Let's take an example. If you have been sent to Mombasa to do, or if you're working as a freelancer, yours will be you take a given photo, which is a good journalistic photo, and you sell it to a house, and will be a given type of journalist. Then there are those ones who will do it for art. Somebody who goes out and looks into a given area and says, yes, this place looks very nice. If I take a photograph like this one and I go and display this, and those who want, actually those ones who go to art galleries, they take photos and they have their own art gallery. Those are the art photojournalists or photographers. Then we have another group of photojournalists or photographers that we call industrial photographers. Every industry, let's take an example. If you work for critical oil refineries, and they would want to do a particular, they would want to do a particular demonstration. They will employ a photojournalist or a photographer who will be able to do photos for them. And when he does or she does those particular photos, it will be for the purpose of particular demonstrations that they would want to do. Freelance photojournalists, we have fashion photojournalists, we have press photojournalists. So it's all field that has several groups of individuals based on their own likes and their own interests. They divide themselves into such areas. Sawa family.
Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
I get you now.
So we basically have several types of them, and it's basically they're doing different things. For example, when you talk about a documentary photographer, they document things. Or they want to document how Kenya changed from a single state to a multi-party state. They would have taken photos, and those particular photos can to show us how demonstrations were done, how press briefings were done, how people demonstrated, and how the police was brutal, eh, like that, until they tell us now a story. They make a documentary, and you'll be able to understand that that's how that works. So,
Yes.
let me let me believe that we are together, and let me now talk about for you, photojournalist. What is this that makes you really a good photojournalist? That when if for example you have been invited by a given media house and they have asked now they want photojournalists, what is this that will make you stand up and be counted as compared to the rest of the people who will be joining or who will be with you there? Now there are basic qualities that one needs to be able to have, and when you look into those particular qualities, we need to be able to look at the topic. Let me say we have defined photography, one as an art and two a science. Now, a person who can be able or who is in a position to be able to combine the artistic and the technical skills or the science skills so that he or she can be able to produce a photo. That's one particular attribute that this means, therefore, is as a photojournalist, you need one to be able to understand what angles can you be able to so that you can be able to. Those are artistic skills. How do you need to be able to expose your photo or your subject so that it can be able to look good? That's an artistic skill. And two, we need to look into the science part of it, the technical skills. That how does the camera work? If we are going to get into a dimly lit environment, what are the technical aspects that you need to be able to look into so that you can be able to of your camera in the right way? You saw as a photojournalist, you need to be able to have artistic and technical skills and combine them, hence for you to be able to become what? Very good photojournalist. And these are some of the things that you'll get to realize when you go for interviews. They'll tell you, there is the camera, go out and bring us a very good journalistic what? Photo. And when they tell you, they know. Probably in terms of settings of the camera, they have done other settings that cannot allow you to take a good photo. So when they send you out, they will test and see if you've been given a camera. You just go out and press record and start recording and bring back a photo, or do you go and set the camera in the right manner and then know that this is how it's going to give you a good photo? You take that particular photo. How do you take it? Do you go so close to it? Do you go away from it? Do you take it from a given angle? That's how they will test you on the same. Number two, they require a person, or a good photojournalist is a person who is very keen to details. When you talk about a person who is very keen to details, is a person who does not look at things for granted, or who does not take things for granted. For example, if Uhuru Kenyatta stands up and starts to address a crowd, and when he is addressing the crowd, it turns out to become so emotional, and then when you look at him, you get to realize that he's actually dropping tears. Moment. Those are the details that we need now to be able to capture, because they are the ones that can be able to move the crowd. They are the ones that can be able to move the audience when they will be looking, or when they will be looking into that particular. So can you be able to be keen on such what? Details. You remember sometimes back, if you can be able to Google that and see how one particular photojournalist, when John Michuki, the late John Michuki, was the Minister for Transport, he was actually up and about always, that he did not take into consideration such minute things like wearing a socks that was actually torn. And one particular journalist took that particular photo, and it was a photo that actually showed and told people that Michuki was a serious guy. Michuki was a very active and hard-working guy who did not really bother about how he looks, but he did about the things that were happening within our own society. So you need to be very keen to such what? Such details. And the other area that you need to be very keen on is, how imaginative are you? Photojournalist is actually an artist. That's how we look down to. Photography is basically an art. And it being an art, then there's no way you can practice art without being imaginative. You visually imagine. Do you visually become imaginative? When you look into something, there's a different way you can be able to bring it out other than the way other people are seeing it. Being visually imaginative. And that is a skill that you need to be able to have. Another skill that you need to be able to have is good communication skills. Communication skills in the sense that before you are sent out to go and cover an event, you need to be able to send a press conference in the morning with your other journalists, and this will be chaired by the editor. And the editor will always give you an idea. The editor will always give you a brief of what you are supposed to be able to go and cover. When that happens, you be able to interpret that and have his imagination, his idea into your imagination. Can you marry the two? His idea with what you are supposed to be able to bring back in the evening to the newsroom. That's a skill that you need to be able to have. Very good communication skills that come together with your editor and understand what he or she wants, and exactly bring that particular idea the way he had actually told you. And let me say this is basically an art. Say you can have a talent and nurture it well, and sometimes people say you might not have a talent. The moment you practice what you're doing, it actually becomes something that you can be able to do it and well. So it requires you now, whether you have a talent or not, to practice and experience how you can be able to take good photos that can be tell stories. That's something that is very key in particular photojournalists. You have those and other areas of skills that you need are necessary, then be assured that you'll be shining. You'll be a person who can be able to stand out from the rest when it comes to moja. Moja. Hello, umeenda kulala? John, John, John unasikia? Khalid Nur,
Yes, sir. I can hear you. Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm. Esther Kimingi,
Yeah, I can hear you.
you got my explanations?
Not all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
What did you miss?
I got in when you are almost done.
Okay, probably I'm going to have a recap of what we have looked into. Then, in a very light manner, we'll be able to see what we have
Mm-hmm.
missed and see if you can be able to catch up with the rest.
So
Femi, Femi, Elvis, Elvis, reporter,
Yes, I can hear you.
or
Yes,
you umepata vile nimesema?
yes.
Okay. Now, I don't know. I'm seeing a question by John Mtinda. I don't know kama amepotea tena. John Mtinda is basically saying, can photojournalism be defined as a particular form of journalism that employs images in order to tell news stories? That is basically what you have said, that photojournalism is journalism. The only difference that is there is when these other forms of journalism employs the use of words, written or spoken, to tell stories. Photojournalism employs visual images to be able to tell the stories. And we have said that these other forms of journalism employ the use of verbs, action words. Photojournalism employs verbs that are in the form of images that actually show action. If we have a photo that tells us this is what's happening, then that is a photo that we can define as a what? As a verb. It's um, a photo that can enable us to tell a story, and that's basically what we have said. Now, let me have a recap of what we have looked into, and then we can be able to conclude what we have been discussing all along, so that we close this particular chapter. Now, one thing that I've said, photography, in terms of how we define it, we look into photography as a compound word, photo and graphy. Photo is a Greek word that means light, and graphy is a Greek word that means drawing. Now, when you join the two together, they will be able to give you an illusion of drawing by the use of light. But when you talk about it in the simplest ways, or in a manner that you can be able to understand as in terms of journalism, we say photography is a way of capturing images, and these particular images are the ones that you will be able to use so that you can be able to tell stories, instead of now looking into the drawing and the light. And we have said, how do you capture these particular images? One, you will be able to have a subject, you'll be able to have light, and you'll be able to have the camera. Now, when light falls on the subject and it's reflected back, it actually falls on the camera. What the camera basically does is to capture that particular reflected light. When it captures that particular reflected light, it registered it actually registers that particular light, and that's what we see as a photo, or as a picture, or as a frame. Like I've told you, some people will use the term picture, some people will use the term photo, some also will use the term frame. They basically refer to one and the same thing. However, frame is much used in videography or cinematography, as opposed to photos and pictures that is actually used in still photography. Now, when you talk about photography, and we also have journalism, where we are coming in, you'll be able to realize that journalism is a way of telling stories, or news, or telling uh, telling telling stories about current events, or current issues about the society. Now, when you look into photography and journalism and combine them together and have photojournalism, what's going to happen is that we'll be able to define it as a way of telling stories by the use of photos, or by the use of frames, or by the use of pictures. So photojournalism becomes a way of telling visual stories. And when you tell these visual stories, when other forms of journalism uses words, photojournalism uses photos to tell those particular stories. And what will be the good photos that we can be able to use in photojournalism? We have agreed that when journalism will be using action words, that's verbs, so journalism will be using action photos, photos that show us action. And when you do that, then you can be able to have now what we refer as professionally as good photojournalistic what? Good journalistic photos. Photos that can be able to tell stories. That one is going to look into that particular photo, and he or she will be able to see, or will be able to understand, this is the story. This is what's happening. And I've given an example of, if we can be able to have President Uhuru Kenyatta standing and addressing a crowd, and President Uhuru Kenyatta posing for a picture, Osha might be looking very good, and the other one might not be able to have a good exposure, might not be having a good background. But the one where he is addressing the crowd, when where it is not well exposed, will be a very good journalistic photo. Why? Because it shows us an action. There's something that is taking place, as compared to the one where he's standing and there's a very good background. That one can be used now for process of beautifying a home. You have it on the wall, but not the one that but the one that is showing us him addressing the crowd is now what you can be able to use to tell a story. And lastly, what you have basically said is what will be the best skills or what will be the right attributes, qualities that make you stand out as a good photojournalist. If you go out for an interview, what is this that will make you be the best out of the rest? You have said one, you need to be able to combine artistic and technical skills or artistic and science skills. That taking photos is basically an art. How you take those particular photos. If I give you two cameras and I tell the two of you to go out and take a photo of a particular subject, I will have two stories from those two photos. Now, the reason why I have two stories is because how you took the photo of that particular subject. And you be able to have those artistic skills. And science is all about how do you control the light, how do you make use of that particular camera, how do you do your settings so that at the end of the day we can be able to have a photo as a product from that particular camera. Those are artistic and technical or science skills. You need to be able to have the two together. Number two, we talk about being attentive and uh, being keen to details that people take for granted. There will be those small things that people don't look at, or sometimes people neglect. But you get to realize that those are the things that actually will tell us stories, because always there will be a story behind the story. Very keen on those in and small details that people take for granted. And number three, we talk about being visually imaginative. How do you look into things? When other people will be looking into a flower and saying, yes, this is a nice flower, it's looking nicely, and you be able to visually become imaginative and take it from a different angle and tell a story other than it being beautiful or looking beautiful. Can you be able to tell something else other than that? Those are the areas that we need to be able to focus onto. The other thing is probably you need to be able to nurture yourself, practice a lot, gain a lot of experience. Some people say you have a skill, some people say you have a talent, but it all depends on how often do you do it. There's nobody who has a talent to ride a bicycle, but when you ride that particular bicycle every other time, you'll get to realize that you become so good at it, and people start now saying, he has a talent or she has a talent. It's not a talent. It's how quite often do you practice taking it, and at the end of the day, that's what shall be able to give you what you need. So for today, I think that's what we have. And if you have a question, kindly you can pass it up. Look at it, or you can ask. I come to it before we can end this particular content. Khalid,
Yes,
pamoja.
yes, tuko pamoja.
Emi, Emi,
Yes.
tuko pamoja.
Yes.
Esther,
Tuko pamoja.
umeelewa wakati wa kuwa sawa. Elvis, Elvis, so what Elvis? You're back now. Elvis, Elvis Murunga. Okay, what we are going to do now is we can revert back to the Moodle wall or the portal, and on the forum that I'm going to create now, I'm going to create a wall so that we can have a discussion. And at the end of the lesson, I will be able to turn to it and see uh, what is it that you have responded to in relation to what I'm going to post there. And we can be able to do the lesson in the next 20 or so minutes. So,